When civilians need help, they call the police. When the police need help, they call the Emergency Service Unit.
Police emergency service workers are being credited with saving a woman's life.
New York cops in full combat regalia.
CNN, there are reports of an explosion possibly.
I thought about it, and I've said in the past, we usually bust out that introduction when we're having bosses from ESU on, if you were a sergeant, lieutenant, captain, so on and so forth in the unit. But because, as I was talking about with the guest who will introduce momentarily, we're having someone who served in emergency service just outside of the NYPD emergency service unit. And I'm not talking about guys, and this is no offense to them, they always give us great shows, who were in transit rescue or housing rescue and came over with the merger. Just somebody who was in ESU, just never ever served in the NYPD side of it. So we're in uncharted territory in this miniseries tonight, but I think it's cool. I think we should start to branch out a little bit and shine a spotlight on Port Authority Police ESU. If you can get Suffolk and Nassau County ESU guys, any guys on the ESU side in Jersey, certainly MTA Police ESU, and tonight, Corrections ESU, as we'll spotlight. Before we get into that, just a quick aside. If you haven't checked out the previous episode, that was volume 13 of another miniseries, The Best and Bravest Nationwide, and that was with Mike Dragadetti, who retired after 28 years with the Stamford, Connecticut Fire Department, most of which I should say, because he had 6 years as a chief's aide. He served with Rescue One, which is their heavy rescue company down there. And, it's a busy city, a lot going on in that city, and he certainly had his share of work over the near 30 years that he was there. So this is volume 57 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's emergency service unit. I'm not going to keep my guests waiting too long. Really excited about this one. I'm really excited now that daylight savings time has beckoned again. It's light out. It's not dark at 6 o'clock for a change, so I'm thriving as we enjoy that. And a nice weather day today, too, so that helps. Couple ads to run. You guys know the drill. And the first thing is going to be our buddy Vince from Armor Tuff. When it comes to firehouses, the floors take a beating. Boots, waters, tools, apparatus traffic, it just never stops. That's why departments like the Gloucester City, New Jersey Fire Department and so many others trust Armor Tuff flooring and tile. From the hallways to the training rooms to the apparatus bays, Armor Tuff delivers a clean, professional finish built to handle the daily grind of the job. Durable, seamless, and designed specifically for high-demand public safety environments, this isn't just flooring, it's infrastructure you can count on. And it doesn't stop at the floor. Take a look at the Grove's gear racks, built with integrated security features to protect turnout gear, personal equipment, and department assets. Secure storage, smart design, and built to last, because your gear deserves the same protection you provide to your community. If your department is ready to upgrade its space from the bay floor to the gear room, reach out to Armor Tuff Flooring and Tile, built for the fire service, built to last. You know what else is built for the fire service? Granite State. Hey there, firefighters and fire buffs. If you're tuning in to the Mike the New Haven podcast, you know the value of reliable gear. At Granite State Fire Helmets, we're proud to introduce the TL2, our premium leather Phoenix fire helmet. The TL2 is all about comfort, durability, and that timeless style you trust. And here's the best part. All in-stock inventory usually ships within 24 hours, so you'll have it in your hands in no time. Plus, our company is proudly owned and operated by firemen, so you know we've got your back and understand exactly what you need out there on the front lines. So don't wait. Gear up with the TL2 today. Granite State Fire Helmets, where tradition meets innovation, and where firemen have you covered. Have you covered indeed. And as always, hello to Christian Williams, Chris Ebden, former New York City EMS guy, John Costello, Joe Maliga, Don Gonzalez, and Ken Bowen, former sergeant out of Truck 2. In the NYPD Emergency Service Unit. My next guest built his career in one of New York City's most demanding environments, starting in the Department of Correction before earning his place in the mid-90s in its Emergency Service Unit. He operated on an island where the mindset was simple. You handle it yourself. And he became a technical rescue specialist, graduated the NYPD STS, in 1999, as he'll tell me about tonight, and eventually became an instructor down at Floyd Bennett Field, shaping the next generation of operators. And after responding to the devastating tragedy of September 11th, 2001, and staying throughout the duration of that operation and the recovery efforts that would ensue throughout late 2001 into early 2002, his path would shift from operator to, as he'll tell me about tonight, educator. And ultimately, it led to him becoming a chief instructor with Roco Rescue as well. And you can see the patch behind me on my wall. So he'll tell me about that tonight. I think that was a gift from my buddy Billy Kennedy a while ago. And that for this volume 57, a different one and a special one of the E-Men inside the NYPD's emergency service unit, is a guy who was, again, in corrections emergency service, Bob Cower. Bob, we talked about doing this for a little bit now, so it's nice to finally do this. Welcome.
No, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Hopefully it can give you a little bit of insight on the correction side of our world.
Absolutely. I look forward to that. And again, a lot to cover tonight. Before we get to that, as you know, you watch the show. So I asked the same thing to you. I asked it to everybody else. Where'd you grow up?
I actually grew up on Long Island, Port Jeff Station. 80s, had pretty much my sister, my parents, a nice little house out there. And then as I got married and moved up, I ended up moving upstate north to Orange County, New York.
Okay.
That's where I reside now.
All right. Yeah. A lot of guys on the PB and FD side certainly live around those parts. Not uncommon. Now, as I like covering with guys who got on 70s, 80s, 90s, in your case, 80s, you're of the generation where a lot of guys are saying to you, hey, take the test. You don't got to take the job, but just take all the tests. City job's a good job, pension, so on and so forth. So were you that guy that took all the tests?
Yeah, I took all the tests, and corrections actually called first. And the money at the time was good. So, I mean, starting, I think, was somewhere in the low 20s. And I think before the year was over, I was already in the 50s.
Oh.
So it was like, this is kind of crazy. All I got to do is work in a jail and watch people. It really wasn't that hard of a job, but I still had my options open for PD. And I did put it for FD, but there was, at that time and era and generation, I wasn't in that kind of shape for that.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a different ballgame, but people forget about corrections because, listen, this is not to knock the guys working on the street and the police side. Shout out to them. Definitely not to knock the guys on the fire side. Shout out to them as well. Listen, it's a lot of dangerous work that goes on out there, but somebody's got to keep an eye on these bad guys. And you got your bad guys in there that are in there for stupid stuff. They're really harmless. They're in there for ticky-tack nonsense that they should have known better.
Oh, yeah. Oh, without a doubt. But the thing is like you said, we're not going to. It's when you're the fire department, you see what's in front of you. Law enforcement on the streets, you kind of have an idea, but when you're in corrections, you don't have an idea. You don't know where it's going to come from.
Stand by, guys. I think Mike just froze, so we're gonna put Bob in the back room until Mike is able to figure it out. Let's see here. I think Mike got excited. He was talking about the warm weather and all that. There he is. I think he's coming back now. There he is, the man of the hour. Oh, nope. Let's see something here. Just bear with us, guys. Bear with us. I think Mike must not paid his Wi-Fi or something. I don't know. I don't know what's going on with Mike. He keeps coming in and out. Let's see here. Let's see if we can put a little commercial here for you guys. In the meantime, while Mike is able to figure this out, we're going to put this on a loop until he's back. So just bear with us shortly. We apologize for the technical difficulties.
Okay, so if you guys can hear me, I'm probably lagging right now, but you know what? Hey, that's fine. We'll get through it. We'll continue. I apologize for that. So as long as you guys can hear me, give me a thumbs up, Vic. Okay, you know what? Hey, then we'll go. I'm on a different browser, so I'm going to be looking like, but that's okay. We'll bring Bob back in. I apologize for the delay, folks. I don't know what the heck is going on with my computer. But where we left off with is, again, listen, somebody's got to watch the bad guys. Obviously, some are more hardcore than others. And as you were saying, on the fire department side, you see what's in front of you. Law enforcement side on the streets, you see what's in front of you. Corrections, on the other hand, you take it from there.
Oh, you got to look. Your head's going to be on a swivel. You don't know where it's going to come from. You could be talking to somebody, and somebody will come up behind you. So they run in packs, they run in gangs. Especially back in the '80s, it was more of a gentleman's thing, where it is now, where the young kids per se like to run as groups and they don't want to fight themselves or by themselves, where back then grown adults, they made a mistake, it was good, bad, or indifferent. It just, that's the way it ended, and it was nothing personal. It was just business,
right? Absolutely. So as things progressed, you may have some people, and you mentioned it was more of a gentleman's game, but did you have some people, especially as you were a newer CO, looking to test you, looking to see what you were made of early on?
Oh, without a doubt. I was fortunate enough when they were just coming out with 5-digit shield numbers. I caught an old 4-digit shield number that looked a little old, so it wasn't so bad for me. But again, then you still, beside proving yourself to inmates that would test you, you had your senior correction officers that had time there that, you had to prove yourself to them too, because you were going to back them up. God forbid anything happened. So it was always a test in the beginning on what your capabilities were, or how long you would last. And again, you're in an environment that, at night they turn the lights out. It's 50 of them and you, and your partner's in the A station, and he can't do nothing for you. So you're pretty much on your own. But again, it's a respect too. It's, you give what you get. There are human beings. They're entitled to certain things that they get. It's the problem is when people start giving more than they're supposed to. And now all of a sudden you're behind the 8 ball, and when they want more, you better produce more. So, and unfortunately there was staff that did that and did more, to the point where we had weapons that were brought into the prison and drugs. So it kind of, like I said, took a turn for the worst on certain people, because they got themselves too deep or over their heads, especially back then in the 80s.
Absolutely. Bob Carr is our guest. This is volume 57 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's emergency service unit. And an important thing to remember, and listen, a cop on the street, this isn't the first thing that he or she is going to reach for per se, but you're doing this job in law enforcement, no less, without a gun. So talk about, trying to really use your brain in an environment like that where you're outnumbered, no weapon in the form of that. It's a lot, but it teaches you early on, well, de-escalation and being able to communicate with people on a human level.
And that's the whole thing. If you can de-escalate it, I mean, most of the time they weren't after you per se. They were amongst themselves fighting for whatever they want, and you just had to play the peacemaker to a point. Then when, like I said, when we got there in the late '80s, you had what they call the state inmates that were still being housed in New York City, and they felt because they were state inmates, they were untouchable. And we had plenty of riots going on at that time where, no, well, you don't follow directions. There's consequences that come with those. And unfortunately, that's when pretty much the hats and bats stories would come out where, we had to hold our ground because they're not leaving. And we're not going to change anything, and we're not calling for outside help. The only help we'll get is guys who are coming in off their tours or get called into work early. And it's not like back then, it wasn't like you hit the cell phone and a bunch of numbers came up. It was, dialing people personally. And the stories back then is on your day off, you never answered your phone because chances are you had to go to work.
Right.
And it's not like the news was posting all this stuff at the time too. So it was definitely a different era at that time. But again, it made guys stronger, made more cohesiveness with the teams amongst ourselves as correction officers. So it was definitely a wild time, but a good time. We had control. The prisons were ours. We ran them.
Right. Right. And again, at that time, that was the thing, standing your ground. And it's not that you wanted to be arrogant in doing that, but there is a respect factor there. At the end of the day, you're in here for a reason. You did something, whether it was a minor offense or a major offense, that got you here. So there's rules to be followed. And the first problem that you had, whoever it was out on the street, is you didn't do a pretty good job of following those rules out there. So now, why is it called corrections? Well, you better learn how to follow them in here. And of course, so some people are going to be there for a short time. Some people are going to be there for a long time. But the principle is the same. Follow the rules, stay in line, make sure you never lose control of what's yours, which is, again, an asylum of different types of characters, but one that you got to keep control of.
And it was back then, like I said, time that was done right up until, we had the senior guys. You're talking about some Vietnam vets that understood that, hey, this is how it's done. Some country people this is how I was brought up. You did wrong. You took a whooping, and then you went right back to what you were doing. There was nothing personal. It was just business. And those days were long for themselves until the 90s came, and then things started changing. We didn't have as much control. And again, I'm not saying we took rights away from them. They just seemed to get more rights because nobody wanted to deal with the problems. The person who dealt with the problems for us was Commissioner Carrick at the time, who was our correction boss.
I was going to bring him up. Yeah.
He started ComStack really started in corrections. He put a number on things, and he made, people accountable for what they had in their prison. It'd be the supermax inmates to the mentally challenged inmates to, the clowns. And, you better have an answer. Why? How many inmates did you have that are emergency service escorted? That we have to move to court just because of their high classification. So, Commissioner Carrick had that locked down. And a story I got to say, because I was one of the EMTs on Rikers Island, was I got called to one of those meetings, and a chief at the time was having a heart attack.
Oh, wow.
So we ushered him into another room, and it was legit. We had to call for a bus, and we took care of him. And me being me, is I went back into the floor of all these chiefs and asked if there was anybody else that need any medical treatment before I leave, because I knew the stress level was high enough. And I had Commissioner Carrick and his partner, who's his sidekick, John Picciano, just glance at me like they wanted to laugh, but they couldn't. And when I walked out, his number two, Picciano, texted me. He goes, "That was probably the funniest stuff I've ever seen," because every boss in the place froze. They were like, nobody wanted to laugh, but nobody wanted to say a word. And then when I met Commissioner Carrick later on that day, he just laughed at me. He goes, "Dude," he goes, "of all people, it had to be you, huh?" I was like, listen, I'm gonna make a joke of it some way or another, just because I think it's too funny.
All right.
He just scared everybody to death. It was his persona, especially at that time and at corrections. But he brought things on the table that, you assault an officer, you're getting a second charge. You are getting assault charges. You are getting attempted murder charges.
Right.
And you're going to do more time. So you had this little petty larceny or a little charge that you're going to be there for a year. Now you just caught 1 to 3, and now going to go do state time. And that calmed a lot of stuff down because the commissioner at the time, Carrick, kept that in check. But as time went on, those things kind of fell at the wayside, and it got harder and harder to the point where now I mean, I don't even keep in touch with the guys out there anymore because I'm 16 years removed.
Yes.
I don't even know what's going on. I mean, I have a couple friends still in the emergency service, but it's pretty much high escorts. And unless there is a super emergency, they're not calling those guys in, because if you call us into the jail, we're good there for a reason. We're not there to just walk around and shake hands. We're going to clean house.
Right. And I'm glad you brought up Bernie, because a lot of people forget. And, one of my regrets is and I know he was a controversial figure. Some people think highly of Commissioner Carrick, the late Commissioner Carrick. Some people didn't, and that's neither here nor there. He led an interesting life, as we all know. But it's one of my great regrets I didn't profile him on this program, because if you look at Bernie's life, which was quite a life, people forget, yes, his 16 months as commissioner of the New York City Police Department, did a good job, did a very good job. He continued the role that Bratton started, that Safer continued. And, even though he wasn't there long, Bernie was hands-on, and a lot of the cops loved him. A lot of the cops thought highly enough of him. But prior to that, from 1998 to 2000, one of the reasons why Bernie, see the comment in the chat from Vince. Thank you, Vince, for that. Funny enough. But one of the reasons why Bernie was able to put himself in a position to succeed Howard Safer, even though a lot of people thought Joe Dunn would have gotten the job, is because of what Bernie did in corrections, which in that 2-year stretch, although he was not there long, like Bob said, Bernie put a lot of rules in place with the comp stat that drove crime down and reduced a lot in corrections in terms of incidents that were occurring. And I don't remember who he did the interview with, but he was asked about this. And I believe this is like very early on into his tenure, because he took it over, like I said, in 1998. And they're briefing him and they're saying, boss, yeah, this inmate, he beat up another inmate and slashed him in the face. And they're like, okay, what's he going to be charged with? And the guys just looked at Bernie like he had two heads. And he's like, well, what's he going to be charged with? He's like, we normally don't charge him. He's like, well, you're going to start to now. He's like, no. He's getting another charge. And it's a simple concept, but it was foreign. And by the end of Bernie's tenure in 2000, like you said, he had corrections on the up and up. He did a great job.
No, it was definitely safer times. People understood what was going on. Everybody knew their job, even to the point when it came to us in the unit, that he gave us the green light. If you couldn't hold your jail or control your inmates and they were starting to riot, we'd get cut loose. We'd search them. We'd search them again. We'd search them again. We'd find weapons. If they challenged us, we challenged back. We weren't going to just let it go. And he followed us right for that. And he applauded us for doing it. And we applauded him because he gave us that opportunity to do it, which bosses in the past wouldn't, or they right away get stage fright because they know what's coming. They know what's coming. Somebody's going to the hospital, and unfortunately, it's not going to be us.
Right. No, 100%, but he didn't shy away from that. And he was a street guy. He didn't mind getting his hands dirty from his time as a detective, of course, to his time in corrections, to even making 5 arrests as police commissioner for New York City. So before I move on from that, if you guys want to read a great article of the late Commissioner Carrick, who sadly died last year, I think he had a heart issue. Mm-hmm. It's from March of 2001, pre 9/11. No one knew what was coming 6 months later, but the New York Times had an article of I'm paraphrasing the title. Our current police commissioner only knows how to run the department at one speed. It's a very, very good profile of him and kind of his journey. And I think we talked a little bit about his tenure in corrections. Getting back to your career, 95, you're about a decade, close to a decade into your tenure, and the opportunity to go into ESU comes up. Now, 2-part question here. Tell us about, of course, getting into the unit. And for those that don't know, and I certainly don't, which is why I'm glad you're here tonight, the history of corrections ESU. Fill us in.
Oh, it actually started as CERT, and they were called the Turtles because they actually wore heavy flak vests for riot control. as time went on, CERT became the emergency response team. And again, we was pretty much there to assist the officers in riot control and heavy rescues or heavy extrications, or we transported. So anybody during those eras was, if anybody had a supersized charge or headline news, because we dealt with inmates, we were the ones that were transporting them. Now, depending as time went on, we get to the Larry Davises and stuff. Well, because of his situation, we did the transfer. Technically, he's our prisoner, but NYPD did the assisting backup because, again, people wanted him out. So that being said, is that as I came on into corrections, I was given an opportunity to try out for emergency service. I'm 6 foot, 200 pounds. I was a small guy on the team. So I had a few hurdles to do, and it came with, it was just like in other departments is you get a blessing to try out, but that doesn't put you on the team. That gives you an opportunity to try out for the team. And one of my bosses at the time that was giving me that opportunity is Sheriff Errol Toulon out in Suffolk County. He's a good friend of mine to the point where our families kind of knew each other as that's Uncle Errol, and my kids were, his nieces, because we've hung out together and everything else. But on the backside of that was that I had to still make the team. And what we do is we call Hell Week, is we pretty much drag you through the mud, push-ups, workouts, physical hand-to-hand, pretty much just pats and bats with each other, just to see where you stand and how long you can put up with it. And again, a lot of it's mind game, because again, it's a game. You have to keep your head up. Once you start letting yourself down, and that means you're going to let your partners down, because there's only 10 of us to 12 of us on the team making the entry into the housing area, which there's 50 inmates minimum, that we have to hold our ground. We're not letting them overrun us.
Absolutely. And in a situation like that, command presence is everything. And a good question from John Costello. I meant to ask it before my camera decided to, have an aneurysm and everything else. But John's question was, just going back to when you first started, what was the CO turnover during your era?
It wasn't that bad because the money was so good.
That's good. That's true.
The money wasn't bad. So, I mean, people who wanted to be cops came on. The turnover started coming into the mid to late 90s is when people started realizing that corrections really wasn't corrections. If you couldn't handle it or put up with the college and everything else, because at the time we still didn't need college when I first started. And you didn't need to go college until the late 90s is when they starting to press the college for corrections, where NYPD, you needed college. So it was like, it was an easy job. It wasn't that bad. The trick is not to stay in jail, to find a niche. So transportation was a niche. Going to the courts was a niche. Just not being in the housing area 24/7, or because you're doing time just like they are, you just get to go home, at the end of your shift, if you got done with your shift. If people didn't show up, you had to stay a second shift.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you'd be in the housing area.
Yeah. Doing a double. Vinny Manco's in the chat. He says hi. He says, good man, Bobby. We're the same STS class.
Yes. Love Vinny.
Yeah, Vinny was on the show a little while ago, as you know. And of course, Vinny finished out his career in JTTF, and Vinny will be featured in my upcoming book, Police Don't Move, the NYPD Investigations You Should Know About. Now, for those of you, again, just tuning in, you're wondering, Mike, you're lagging. Your frames are stuck in 1996. I'm on a different browser because I had a technical difficulty earlier, so I'm using a different browser. But the audio is good. At least you guys can see me, and we're back and doing our bit here, thanks to producer Victor, who held it down while we had that brief technical difficulty. Now, an interesting layer to this, too, and I'll get to some of the pictures Chief Pagan has, retired Chief Pagan has, and also one of the rigs too, is you get into the unit in 95, but then, like Vinny's saying, Vinny got on in NYPD ESU in 99. Why the STS if you were already in the unit? I'm curious.
All right, so that was kind of a bonus per se to get over to that unit, because we changed our name to emergency service. We had to provide a service. So our service really was more for the Department of Corrections inmates, not per se the civilians that are on that island. So if there was motor vehicle accidents, things like that, we had in-house training, but nothing to the level that we could do at STS. So what happened was for myself was in 99, we had an officer go down. I did everything possible to save him. Unfortunately, we lost him, but because of the calmness I had, keeping people in control, and we did unfortunately, a rolling morgue for that person because he ended up passing inside, and somehow one of the chiefs made a bad call at night, and I kind of cleaned up the whole show. So it made him look good. And in turn, they cannot just give me an award for something like that. And at the time, Chief Wagenstein and Warden Dash, who was in charge of security, and both were, asked me if I wanted to go to NYPD school. And I'm like, yeah, why not? 6 months? Yeah, I'll go. You know, I'm going to get some of the best training, I could be offered to me. I'll take it. So that's how much I got into SDS. But again, us coming to STS, we already went through our hell week to go through it, where the NYPD guys had to go through their hell week of running, swimming, everything else, just to go to the school. Us going to the school as a couple of the correction guys was that we still had to prove ourselves, and I'm not going to knock that. But the problem is if we didn't pass anything or a syllabus or anything, we'd go back to the correction department with our heads hanging low, like, oh, we didn't make it there. NYPD guys don't pass, they go back to patrol. And that's a hard nut to bite too, especially when you were just with the big boys and now you're going back to the floor again or back out on patrol when you had the opportunity. So, and that's why the guys at STS, and when I was going through it and I watched it, and being an instructor later on out there's a reason why we pushed you guys and pushed those guys to be the best they could be. Because again, when we explain it to them, it's like, hey, you're not a detective per se, police officer. You are one rank up because you have to make decisions. You do have bosses will come there to assist you, but when it first starts out, you're pretty much that person. Yeah. And that's what we liked about that. Yeah. And our bosses like that when we came back, even though we had bosses, sometimes we had to make decisions that was like, our supervisors were not taking away from them, or jailed supervisors. They never saw anything outside of the jail setting. Well, we have, 90 something acres of all kinds of stuff that can happen out there, from gas leaks to car accidents to, we already had a plane crash out there years and years ago, back in the 50s. So anything is possible. Boats rolling up on the beach, bodies floating up on it. These are all crime scenes and things that we learned at NYPD that, hey, this is a crime scene and we have to address it as that. We weren't taught that in the academy as correction officers. So these are things we had to pick up on. And we, guys who went to that school, which there was a handful of us who did, paid attention to what was going on and used those same skills when we went back there after we were done.
Right. No, it's a great proving ground. Now it's even longer. It's 9 months now. So it pretty much takes up a majority of the calendar year. There was a point in time for guys that got into ESU in the 80s where it was about 6 weeks. You learned what you learned in the trucks. And that's not to say you still don't learn what you learn in the trucks when you get there now. It's just more extensive. Times have changed, and naturally the STS has changed along with it. But it's a lot of, I think the good thing for you, though, and anybody else that from corrections that was with you in 99, going through that STS, is that, kind of like you said, you had a foundational knowledge because it wasn't training you weren't necessarily unfamiliar with per se in the previous 4 years. But like you said, and I like how you put it, it's training that you had never received before from the standpoint that it's a level up because SDS has that high standard. So you had that skill set. You come out with new ones in those 6 months. And even though, nobody ever knows everything, I imagine you felt a heck of a lot more well-rounded, and that prepared you for whatever else may have lied ahead.
Oh, yeah. And everything got brought out on 9/11. That's when, you had to know what you were doing and how to do it. But prior to that, again, we were the response for Rikers Island. For anything that happened, We had rope jobs, we had confined space jobs, we had auto extrications going on. We had gun jobs going on. As much as people don't think of it, they were guns in jails. We had to do the same clearing and everything we were doing before. The problem is that, again, we don't know where it's coming from and who. And the crazy part is how it got there. On the streets, we know the guns where they come from.
Right.
When you're in the correction department, somebody brought the gun. It just doesn't miraculously show up. So beside that person who has the gun, it's the person who brought the gun and why.
Seems we lost Mike yet again. Gonna put Bob in the back room again. I'm sorry, Bob.
That's all right.
Sorry about the technical difficulties. See what we can do here. Until Mike gets back, I guess it's a good time to put this ad real quick. It's the Chop Seat.
Baseball fans, if you bleed Braves country red and blue, this one's for you. Check out the Chop Seat podcast hosted by Victor Mignetis. Every week, Victor dives deep into all things Atlanta Braves and Major League Baseball, from game recaps and trade rumors to player spotlights and the latest league news. Whether it's breaking down the lineup, debating pitching rotations, or talking postseason chances, the Chop Seat gives you honest takes, sharp analysis, and a fan's true passion for the game. So if you're looking for your go-to Braves and MLB podcast, pull up a chair and join the conversation. Subscribe to the Chop Seat today on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. Because in Braves country, there's always room at the Chop Seat. Baseball fans, if you bleed Braves country red and blue, this one's for you. Check out the Chop Seat podcast hosted by Victor Mignetis. Every week, Victor dives deep into all things Atlanta Braves and Major League Baseball, from game recaps and trade rumors to player spotlights and the latest league news. Terrific. Whether it's breaking down the lineup, debating pitching rotations, or talking postseason chances, the Chop Seat gives you honest takes, sharp analysis, and a fan's true passion. Making the spotlight tonight, indeed. So if you're looking for your go-to Braves and MLB podcast, pull up a chair and join the conversation. Subscribe to the Chop Seat today on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. Testing one, two, can you hear me? There's always room at the Chop Seat. You can.
All right, he's back, guys. He's back.
Let's hope it doesn't continue to do this. I don't know what's going on tonight, but we're working through it. As I left off on, and this is what I wanted to get into as well. Dive into those jobs because, and we'll get into the 11th in a little bit too. Because a lot of people, to what we were talking about just now before that happened, wouldn't think that these things go on in the jail environment. They never hear about it. It generally, unless it's something really catastrophic, doesn't tend to make the news. They think of the street work, and yeah, you could see an MVA on the street. You can see an extrication or a confined space rescue on the street. You can't necessarily see it in there. So again, another reason why I'm glad you're here tonight. Dive into some of those jobs and what they entailed.
I mean, a perfect example is that, again, once you cross that bridge, it's no man's land. It's, we handle ourselves. On the fire side, we will call for assistance when it's that bad, but we had a fire department that would assist or start the job. Us as emergency service went through some courses to assist the fire department. We actually had an Oshkosh crash truck just for crowd control, but it had 3,000 gallons of water if we needed it. So, anything that happened on that island, we kept it internally. There was no drones watching what we were doing. Nobody, we were next to the airport, so it wasn't like anybody could come in and watch what we're doing. So, I mean, we had a lot of toys, and people wouldn't expect that we had M113 Abrams tanks from the 60s to carry guys into the yards. So it was an interesting time, but we ran the jails. So, and again, the problem we had as I got into emergency and went through NYPD's EMT school was that we took care of our own. So if officers were assaulted, my partner, a couple guys who are EMTs would respond to that jail to assist our staff. Even though there was medical staff there, they were contracted for the inmates, not so much the staff, which we thought was kind of crazy. and we'd go right to where the officers would be injured to assist them and get them out of there. And I go back to, we had a Sheila Vaughn, who was the chief of our department. We went to a floor, and it was an officer laid out on the ground, and I'm stabilizing him, and my partner's working on the other guy. And she's like, do this, do that. And I said, listen, I'm doing my job. You do yours and stay out of the way. Well, I look over, and it's Sheila Vaughn, who's the deputy warden of the jail. And she goes, oh, and by the way, I'm a trauma nurse. I'm like, well, it was like, well, you should be over here doing this, and I should be listening to taking notes. And she goes, no, you're the first responder as a medic. You take care of him and get him out of my jail for me. And we became friends after that. And she just laughed at me. She goes, you really don't care, do you? I said, well, I wasn't really expecting you to come out of that. I'm supposed to do my job. And
right.
She said it up front too. She goes, no, I'm a nurse in the hospital setting. This is pre-hospital. Do what you have to do to get my people straight and get them out of there. And then after that became the norm. We always had EMTs available. And even though FDNY would come out there because they have to come to EMT calls, we would tell them that if there's for the inmate, do what you want to do. If it's for us, we have it covered, and, you guys don't need to be going in there, which they appreciated too, because that's one less thing they had to go do is through the security checkpoint and everything else to get into the jail.
Right. No, it's a big help. It's definitely a big asset. And you mentioned some of the vehicles, and this is what we were talking about off air. We can kind of shine a spotlight on that. Here's one of the 1981 Mac. This is from Mike Martinelli's website. And that's, again, situations sometimes you don't know if an inmate sets a fire. Sometimes it's not even that. It's just, sometimes electrical malfunctions, a fire could start. So this was something I imagine you were cross-trained in as part of ESU?
No, that was actually the fire department. That was their puppy. We didn't. That was our fire safety unit. They took it. That was my puppy.
There you go. This was it right here.
That was our yard control riot situation. I put out a couple bus fires with that thing and a side of a dormitory. But that held 3,000 gallons of water and was a beast.
It looks like it. I love the color scheme too, man. That orange and white, it really suits it well. I just love those old school. This is, as you said, the 1978 Oshkosh. So I just love those old school rigs, man, from that era, because there's a special charm to them. And this was your baby too. I'm about to share the screen. It's the background for tonight's episode behind us, and here's the background I'm referring to.
That's all. That was old NYPD 44. We got that right after 9/11. I was really close with the guys. I asked them what was going up for auction, and they kind of turned me on to this truck, and had to do some wheeling dealing with our administration that, hey, we needed this because all we had was small trucks, and that carried everything we needed, plus weapons. So we didn't have to kind of just throw weapons into a back seat of a truck. And they turned it over to us as a gift, and in turn we turned into that. And that's actually the original, and now there is a newer one from Truck One, which is a flat nose Mac that we have. So that is
nice
version. Yeah, we wore that right down till I retired in 09. About 010 that went out of service, and we got a newer one put into service.
So a good run.
So Truck 11 was giving us that number after 9/11 because we were the 11th city emergency service truck per se to help out. So for a while we were holding the number 11, and then Truck 11, Truck 12, NYPD had those trucks on spares and everything else. So we just kind of held that number until that truck went out of service, and then we moved up. The department kept it, just go to Truck 12, which, again, there was a lot of meaning why we did certain things, and it kind of faded away as time went on.
Right. Unfortunately, Bob Carr is our guest tonight. MVP of the show tonight, producer Victor, who's holding it down. Technology's holding right now. Let's hope it holds to the end of the show. But we're getting through it. We're working through a lot of editing to get all those nasty parts out of the show. You didn't see it. It's like Men in Black. We're going to just pretend like you never saw that tonight when we do the editing later on. But appreciate all you tuning in for a unique aspect of the miniseries, the E-Men inside the NYPD's emergency service unit. Now, the auto extrication part's interesting to me because, again, I can kind of see confined space. People can get stuck. I mean, workers even working on stuff in the jail can get stuck somewhere. But when it comes to, and I'll talk about cell extractions in a moment with you too, because we haven't hit that. When it comes to auto accidents, what are we talking? Just like besides the vehicles already out of the facility, people coming to visit an inmate and crashing?
Oh no, no, because civilians are not allowed. Well, civilians can drive on the island that work in administration, medical, things like that. The average civilian cannot drive on the island. Officers drive on the island if you have a special pass that lets you drive on the island. But it doesn't. Speed limits are speed limits. People don't listen to speed limits or pay attention to them.
They're just suggestions.
Or they cut in front of a bus because they feel they can make it. Silly things like that. And, then we get called to it. And it's like, and you kind of laugh at it because you pull up and you're like, I'm on an island. Where are you going in such a rush?
Right.
It's not that big where I got to be there in seconds. I'm not a surgeon. So, then we have people that get banged up and we take them out of the car. And of course, then we hear all kinds of craziness that, don't touch me, don't do this. You're nobody. You're just a CO. It's like, okay. If that's what you want, you'll have to wait because,
we're the best you got right now.
and that's what you're trying to explain to them. It's like, you're really not getting anybody else anytime soon.
Right.
EMS will send a bus out there, but they're in no rush.
Right.
Again, it's Rikers Island.
Yeah, exactly. And you guys, we were talking about it off air. You guys had, you did have. I'm looking at a picture of it right now. It's one of Chief Pagan's photos. I'll share it so you can see it. Well, the ambulance, yes, but also the smaller REPs, kind of in the style of the NYPD ESU REPs too. Photo I'm talking about, let's pull it up here, is this one.
Yeah, that was our old utility trucks. The one right there in the middle. That was we had those from 2000 when I got to the unit, 95, 96. We picked up a bunch of those. They were 4-seaters because, again, transporting guys around, it was always a hard problem with putting people into places. So we kind of had a couple of those rigs. Again, they were semi-loaded with a gear. Of course, more riot gear per se than other, like city equipment that they have. So, of course, they were meant for riot control. But, again, our biggest thing was searching and having equipment to search cells, having different, again, just like NYPD, guys carry their gear bag. They have their little toys and their little knickknacks that make things go away for them. We had the same thing, looking under lockers or lifting things up. The search, because again, their inmates' jobs is to hide stuff from us and figure out a way of disturbing the jail. Our job was to find those things and charge them for contraband.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was something that you did very often. Speaking of often, Christian Williams in the chat wants to know how often did auto extrications and MVAs occur while you were there in those 14 years?
We were good for at least one every other month.
Pretty good ratio.
Which was crazy. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it was dumb enough where, they got themselves out of the car or we had to show up and get them out of the car. But again, it was, you had buses coming onto Rikers Island, people trying to get off Rikers Island. People are not paying attention. Guys who actually did doubles and triples, they're tired. It's, at a certain point, once you leave that jail and get a bus ride to the parking lot, if you didn't have your car parked on Allen, if you were fortunate enough, you're already getting tired. Now I just sat on a bus for 10, 20 minutes. Now I'm really exhausted. And now I'm going to get into my car to drive.
Right.
So,
not a recipe for success.
Not, and unfortunately not at all, because that was the mindset was, you're just going to work. The money was good, but you still were, it's not like you just get into your car and go home. You had downtime before you got to your car.
Right. And this is another favorite of mine too. The tank. I'll zoom in on it now if I can. This is Chief Thomas. I don't know who the gentleman is here, but Chief Thomas, Chief Pagan as well in front of the tank.
That is actually Andrew King. He was one of the operators of that rig. So that was the one of our transports for the squad going into a yard. They would sit in the back, just like a pretty much vehicle transport for soldiers, and we would sit in the back protected from and then we just drop the back gate and surprise everybody.
I love that. I think this NYPD had a tank like that for a while, but I guess like top brass thought it was too intimidating and did away with it. But there's a picture of that from like the mid 90s, 94, 95. But I mean, listen, well, it is intimidating, but you know what? For good reason. Again, we talked about it earlier. Control, control, control. We'll get, like I said, as I said, we'll get to the 11th momentarily. And corrections is really a valuable assistance down at Ground Zero to everybody that was working during that time frame. But cell extractions, like we talked about off air, I quoted our mutual friend Brian Wall, where Brian and I talked about it down at Floyd Bennett Field. That is something very scary. Hand-to-hand combat with some people who, for whatever the reasons are, mental illness, just pure psychosis, or just, even if they're not mentally ill, just purely violent. They want to go toe-to-toe. Obviously, the situation has reached a breaking point where your average CO can't handle it. And much like they say on the street, when a cop needs or civilian needs help, they call the police. When the police need help, they call emergency service. The same philosophy applies out on Rikers Island or any jail for that matter. So when it came to cell extractions and dealing with the worst, tell us about that.
Well, it was like you said, usually when we had those issues is because we were doing a major search because we knew there was weapons, drugs, or whatever in the building. The inmates knew that too. So they would, instead of just coming out of their cell, they would stand their ground. We would have a extraction team available. We'd call it it was pretty much choreographed. Each guy had a position to do. So you had your shield guy, who was usually your 300-pounder. Inmate would charge at him. He would bounce him like a toy off the wall. Then you would have your 2 leg guys come in and grab low and try to grab around his legs. And our 2 upper guys would knock him on the ground. And we would just roll him over, cuff him, and we'd be finished. It was nothing personal. It wasn't freebie shots. It wasn't stomping and dumping. It was, we had everybody had a position to take it. And I mean, we went one day, I think we had 15 cell extractions. Every cell extraction was written the same way. And bosses are like, well, how could that be? Because that is our job. Our job is nothing personal. It's that we bounce him, we tackle him, we spin him and cuff him, and we move on to the next one. Every once in a while, you'd have a guy get his arm out, and we had to struggle a little more. All right, well, we had toys for that at the time. We had Stun Shield. We'd zap you. Those are, we didn't even have back then the tasers and
right,
all that stuff. Those are awesome to have, but back then we did not have that. So it was pretty much hand to hand. We would hit you, you would hit us, we'd hit you harder. At the end of the day, you're not coming out of a cell on your own.
Right.
We just can't let that happen. And we have to stand our ground. So we kept busy with that till it got to the point where we rotate more guys out and rotate guys in. And we just keep going until eventually they start realizing that they're not winning this battle. And we'd move on to the show. And that's all it was. It was just continuous that, depending on the situation, we'd have to go. Some of the times we had to do it because they were court ordered by the judge. They had a murder charge or whatever, and the judge wanted them there by hook or by crook. He had dressed, not dressed, towel, sheet, suit, no suit. It wasn't, he's going to court. And we'd show up and, pretty much we would try to explain to him, dude, this is not going to work out for you. You are going to court one way or another. So we could do this the simple way is that you listen to us, strip down, make sure you have no weapons on you. We cuff you, let you get dressed, and we move on to court. Or we do it the hard way that we're going to tackle you. We're going to still make sure you have no weapons on you, and then we're taking you to court the way you are and put a sheet around you. And the judge won't be happy with us, but he won't be happy with you because you're not coming to his court properly. So we had to deal with things like that also. But again, nothing was ever like one of the guys, Charlie Hall, was my instructor when I came through in '95. This is nothing personal. It's just business. We have to do our job. We do it professionally, and we move on. And that was it.
Yeah, that's it. There's no emotions involved. There's just procedure. I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's all it is. Just procedure and making sure things get done the way they got to get done. Certainly a good point. There's something Vinny Manco said earlier, and I didn't mean to miss it, but we were having a little bit of problems, Vinny. He says, our STS class lost 2 great guys. Paul Talty, yes. On the NYPD side, Emergency Service Truck 10. And Greg Froner, I hope I'm pronouncing Greg's last name right, but Greg was assigned to the Port Authority Police Emergency Service Unit on the PATH side. So I think he responded from the subway level that day.
Yes.
And that, yep.
Actually, he missed one more, Jerome Dominguez.
He was. Oh, that's right. Jerry Dominguez was in your. Yeah,
He was in our STS class too.
that's right. Yeah, truck three. And the thing to remember with Jerome Dominguez is he was somebody that lost a lot of weight. He was a heavier guy, lost a lot of weight. I believe he was an Air Force guy too. Was a highway officer for a while. He was in highway, and then went from highway to emergency. And if you look, there's older pictures of Jerry Dominguez where he looks a lot heavier, and then compare that to those photos in ESU. And man, that guy put the work and the time in. So if you ever want to see an inspiring story of a guy who was determined and worked towards his goal and got his goal, Jerry Dominguez,
Oh, I have some stories with him because he was in our STS class too. What a sweetheart of a guy.
Yeah, I've heard. He was last seen in the South Tower. And Vinny says, holy cow, I forgot, losing my mind. No, you're not, Vinny. It's
Oh, sorry, Vinny. That's why we're here.
And listen, it happens to the best of us. Don't worry. But yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. Jerry's remembered. So is Greg. And again, we're going to spotlight those Port Authority ESU guys on this show pretty soon. And obviously, so is Paul on all the good that he did from Truck 10 that day and even before that day. So that brings us into that day. Were you working when
Yes.
everything went? Okay, so tell us about that.
So every morning we have a workout detail. We're paid to work out, so we have to stay in the shape that we have to stay in. Again, because of the inmates. I was actually supposed to meet Paul and Tommy Langone for coffee that morning. They were going to come out to Rikers because we were talking in the past about it. Because at STS, Paul was in my STS class, but Tommy was one of our elite instructors. And there's nothing to be said about Tommy because Tommy was just aces.
Yep.
And a great instructor at that, let alone he was a teacher, which was awesome. And we saw the first plane hit. We were watching it from Rikers Island. We're like, oh, that's not good. And I was like, well, let's go grab some of our gear. Some of us need to go get set up because we are on the third level of the response from New York City that we'll probably be getting notified of it and to assist because, again, we already came out of STS and we were helping out jobs out on the streets for motor vehicle accidents and small stuff like that to help out 10 truck, 4 truck, whoever's in our area. So we figured out we're going to probably do some extra work. And while we were loading one of our trucks up, the second tower was hit and all hell broke loose. And unfortunately, our trucks weren't even in service because they were all out at the shop. So we're loading gear in these trucks. And myself, Stephen Ryan, Richie Monroe, and there was one other person. We jumped into one truck and we tried to take off to downtown. And we were telling our bosses, we will meet up there. We will start setting up with NYPD's emergency service, and we will assist and let you know where we're going to be. And they stopped us at the bridge and says, no, you have to do a full escort with everybody because we want this to go as one big group, which, again, NYPD, we were taught, we're making notifications and we respond. So in the big scheme of things, that saved all our lives. Right. Because we would have been all the way down there. So we didn't get down there until the second tower fell is when we got into Stuyvesant. And then Sergeant McLaughlin had us all set up in there, started giving us assignments. And we came down there with 25 emergency service guys. And half of those guys were NYPD trained. So, and that was brought up that, hey, who knows what we're doing? Who knows what to do? And who's going to go out with who? So we kind of broke up into teams and we kind of started assisting with those guys, helping out. At some point, which it didn't make the movie, but it happened, was that I brought a battery-operated Jaws of Life out there, which we use for the cell extractions because I cannot bring Hearst tools in there because of the gas operations. And for some reason, I brought it with me, threw it on my shoulder. We walked over to Vesey Street and we saw the hill of guys that night up on the hill saying, hey, you got Sergeant McLaughlin up there and his partner, and they're trapped.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, well, I got this freaking tool on my shoulder. It ain't doing me no good down here. And I just passed it on to the conveyor belt of people and watched it going up and over the hill. And my boss at the time goes, what'd you do that for? I said, well, they need a tool. We're giving them a tool. And he got a little upset about it because he's like, well, that's $10,000. Who knows when to get it? And I'm like, I could care less. If it works, awesome.
You got 2 guys trapped down there fighting for their lives. Who cares?
Because you got to remember, the mindset of corrections to rescue is not, it's a totally different world. You know,
Yeah,
they didn't have their mindset of what we were doing. So 2 days later, I had guys from one of the trucks come over to me with the tool in the back of their gator and said, "Hey, BK, this yours?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's mine." And the thing was open like that. They're like, "I think it's broken." I'm like, "All right, well, whatever. We know McLaughlin and all them are out." He goes, "Yeah, I kind of helped them out." I was like, "Okay, yeah, well, give it to me. I'll put it in my truck, and eventually we'll fix it and get it back out here." You know, that was the mindset I had because that's the way I was taught. You know, use the equipment you have. If you need it, use it. You need more equipment, go get it. But there was no such thing as that, hey, we can't do this job. We have to figure out something to do this job.
Right. And it doesn't, and thanks for telling that story, and we'll dive further into it now as we go. But, you know, it doesn't matter what ESU unit you're in, wherever it is, like we talked about, the different police departments in the tri-state, primarily New York and New Jersey, because Connecticut doesn't have full-time ESU teams. It's more of you can be on patrol and get called into a special operations situation, so you're cross-trained. But it's more of a New York and New Jersey thing. And that being said, the attitude is all the same, which is we don't say no. You know, you get the job, and like you said, you do the job, and you do everything you can to get the job done because there's nobody after you. You're it. You're it. You're the highest level of skill and training and operations level awareness that you can call to a scene. Who else are you going to call? You know, it ain't Ghostbusters, that's for sure. So, you know, listen, you're it.
And that was one of the things going through STS and having the Tommy Langones, the Eric Beckers, who was just on your show.
Yep, he's in the chat.
Bobby Piccianos, you know, Franco Barbario, the Sergeant Smith, you know, Sergeant Dennis O'Connell. You know, those are the instructors out there that you know, you have to do your job. There's no hiding. You're not going to duck and dive. No. You know, you have to step up and do your job, you and your partner, because again, there's not too many more people coming to assist you. You know, on that day, everybody came in. Yes, of course, that was a wholly different show in itself.
Right, that was World War III.
But everybody came in, and you know, at first, I'm not going to say we weren't shunned upon a little bit, but we were because we were the correction department. But as time went on, we were assisting NYPD, Port Authority. Not saying we weren't finding people for FDNY, but everybody stayed in their lane.
Right.
You know, and at one point, when NYPD was doing all their funeral details, we were out there covering their slots so they can take care of the things they needed to take care of, and we had no problem or quims or anything about it because that was we were taught to do by those individuals. So, and again, you know, we took it as personal as we possibly could and did everything we possibly could to represent and respect those guys that were lost. Excuse me, gals.
No, absolutely. And if you look at, and this is not to minimize the other losses, but combine, and we're looking strictly at the special operations component. I did this calculation on the fire department side of their 343 guys that were killed. 97 of them were from their special operations. So you lose all that knowledge. You look at the losses of the NYPD, 23 officers that day, 14 of them from ESU. Of course, there was Paul and then Jerome who were in your STS class. I'm not sure the exact number of Port Authority emergency guys they got killed that day, but quite a number of them. Joe Navas got killed. Greg Froner got killed. George Howard, who helped, you know, contribute to founding the unit in the first place, he got killed that day. So, and it's not just the people they were, but as we've said on the show a million times, and we'll say it a million times more because it bears repeating, you can't replace the knowledge they brought. All that knowledge, you know, it was just lost in two terrifying instances when those buildings came down. Work in the pile, work in the recoveries. Again, you know, you're looking for as many people as you can. It takes a lot out of a man. It takes a lot out of anybody. And I know those are months that you're never going to forget. As far as how it worked between details on the pile and then still keeping guys back at the prisons to make sure everything was copacetic on that front, how did that work during that time period?
We had a lot of support unit guys on the team that would cover in case there was any incidents on the island. I mean, some of the senior guys stayed back that were not going to contribute down there or felt that it was unsafe down there, which we get. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. It is what it is. So, which still gave us more guys that actually knew what was going on back at the job. So you had that thing. Plus, at that time, the inmates were quiet. They want to know what was going on. They had, again, these is New York City inmates who have family that live in New York City that possibly worked at those towers. You know, they wanted as much information as they possibly could. I mean, again, correction department is not the shining light of New York City.
No.
So if we had to roll down 125th Street with a high escort back in the early 90s, we were getting stuff thrown at us too, regardless. That day and after that, people were clearing the roads for us. People were like, get down there, do what you got to do. And that stayed on for months after that because, again, it was, the city was one, which was pretty awesome. And everybody looked out for everybody. Again, the inmates were quiet. They were not trying to disturb anything because they knew the reign of terror would come down on them too, because everybody was already at high level of craziness. And we're trying to keep that part of it controlled.
Yeah, absolutely. And you did the best you could. And I mentioned this when Becker was on, and he says Correction ESU was a great resource in the pile, great bunch of guys. And Vinny, to your point on Jerry Dominguez, mentions we called him Tackleberry.
Yeah,
I'm sure you did.
Yeah, I remember.
Vinny, I'm going to have to talk to you about the origins of that nickname. I'll shoot you a message one of these days. I hope you're doing well, my friend. Always good to see you pop up in the chat. But again, my goodness, I mentioned you mentioned Tommy, and I talk about this all the time. And I talked about this when I had his daughter on, who I'm friends with, Caitlin, wonderful person. Where if you look at that picture, it's an iconic picture, although it's kind of a sad one, of Tommy getting off the REP for Truck 10 with Paul. You see the looks on their faces, and they're not, if you had no context on what they were at, and what, then he says, plead the fifth, fine, and what they were getting ready to head into, you wouldn't know it because they don't have a look of nervousness. They don't have a look of, oh my God. They're like, okay, yeah, we're just going to grab our stuff. We're going to get, and again, if you had no context, you think it's just another job. You wouldn't know it was something like that. And they just looked at the assignment. You don't see any kind of fear in their face. I'm sure they knew the daunting nature of what was happening, but they got their stuff and said, yeah, all right, let's go in. And we'll never know the exact number of people that are still walking today because of what those two guys and all the other guys did. But man, it's a high amount. It's a high amount. And not enough you could say.
No, it was, like I said, those guys on that morning, everybody did what they possibly could do to get as many people out of there as possible. Mm-hmm. And it could have been a lot worse.
Yep.
And, again, going back to Sergeant McLaughlin over at Port Authority, was having a game plan for each floor for their evacuation. Instead of everybody piling into one staircase, it was broken down to all multiple staircases that just kept the spinning going, so nobody ever really bogged down on each other because they were practicing that. So there was a lot to say from the 93 attack to that one, that how many people were actually saved that got out of that building.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, 25,000 people were able to escape that day because of the joint efforts of, the Port Authority Police, the New York City Police, courts officers, can't forget them. 3 of them lost their lives that day. EMS, certainly the FDNY. A lot of people still walking around today. They got to get home to their families that night. And the guys knew the cost. Ken Winkler from One Truck said it best. And he didn't say this with me, another character who I've had the good fortune to have on this program. He didn't say this with me, but the interview he did with 511 Tactical a few years ago for the 20th anniversary, he highlighted it. Somebody asked him if they knew, both the guys working in Tower 2 and the guys working in Tower 1, they were going to come down like they were going to come down, what do you think they would have done? And he got a little emotional, but I loved his answer. He kept it to the point. He was like, I think they just would have worked faster. Absolutely. And he would know. He would know, and they would have just worked faster. And they got a lot of people out that day. So the cleanup ends in the spring of 2002. Daunting assignment. And with it, it's still up here. It's never going to not be up here. But you slowly start to get back into a routine of how things were day to day prior to this tragedy. When was that? Summer of 02, you would say, getting back into the swing of things as they were?
It was, well, we were pulled off the pile pretty much in the January-ish time frame. We had to go back down for, of course, the closing ceremonies and things like that. And they only brought individuals down there for that. But stuff started getting right back to the swing of things probably within a few months after the new year, because, again, we have to keep going. We don't have that luxury where things were going to stay quiet for us. Same with NYPD. We started assisting NYPD more out on the street, per se, in the surrounding areas if they needed us for pretty much we stick with auto education, or again, you had the hammer teams for hazmat and stuff. We kind of assisted if they needed a body, we gave them a body. So it wasn't like, because guys were trained and went through those courses, they kind of were handpicking guys to come help out, which in turn at the time, Randy Miller took over the STS ropes and everything. And me and him ended up, funny thing, we kind of met, we knew each other a little bit before 9/11, and we kind of met more on the pile because I assisted him and Scotty Roberts out of a confined space because they were doing a search and all the bells and whistles are going off to clear the pile. And there was myself and my partner, those two, and all four of us are standing there looking at each other, and it wasn't anybody on the pile. It was like, well, what's going to collapse? And we all kind of just looked at each other like, well, no sense of running. We're not going to get that far anyway. And we started walking over to the 20th century building, and we heard some guy yelling out, hey. We looked down, it was a fireman. He jumped down into a void thinking that the buildings were going to collapse, and he was just like kind of stuck out there in a pile. So we kind of pulled him up, and then now the five of us are standing there looking at each other like, well, nothing fell. I guess we might as well just head back to the command post and start all over. So we all kind of shook hands with the fireman guy, and we went on our merry way. But Randy Miller and I started a rapport where that he would send guys from the STS classes to Rikers Island for cell extractions, for hand-to-hand using chemical agents, and we kind of started the rope program. So we kind of introduced the guys that never saw ropes. I would get them for 2 days to teach them a few knots, show them a few systems, understand how to put the gear on, and then we'd ship them back to STS, and then I would get another batch. And we kept that rotation going. So when we did the cell extractions, they went through that. And then when they kind of went out to the field, they kind of had a little bit of knowledge that, hey, this is what ropes are, not that I didn't really get to see this before. So it was a good rapport that we had going on for a little while out there.
Yeah, it's a good program. Definitely a good program. Let's get into that because Rocco's right behind you, is right behind me. That's so a little shameless plugging going on. Rocco, you might want to sponsor the Mike the New Haven podcast. Just saying. But around 2004 is when you became an instructor with them. And again, it doesn't matter what facet of special operations you're involved in, rather it be the police emergency service side or obviously the fire department side. You got to know your knots. It's critical. And rope discipline is one of the best disciplines you could have as a guy that's trying to become a fireman. Like yours truly, believe me, it's something I'm learning as each day goes by. So tell me about how that opportunity came about to be an instructor with them.
Well, because Rocco is part of New York City's Mercy Service program for their 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks of their STS school. And I was continuously going out there to assist on teaching those courses. And Randy Miller, and at the time, Sergeant O'Connell, who was just retired, was like, hey, why don't you come take our instructor development course? I'm like, you sure? And like, no, yeah, you should take it. And I took the course out there at Floyd Benefield, a handful of us, and became an instructor. And from there, it just took off. It was, hey, I did not know really what Rocco did per se still, not realizing that we do standby rescues around the country. I kind of worked the Northeast for that because we have some clients up there. And we teach all around the country, be it municipalities or industry, because that's where our bread and butter is, because we kind of helped assist writing the OSHA standards for that back in the 80s with our owners. So it was kind of interesting. And I was like, I took the course, then I started coming to do a couple jobs around the country, which in turn I did more. And besides still assisting at NYPD, I was doing this as a side gig. So I'd take some vacation time and go teach somewhere just to keep my skills going and to learn more. And I just kept on festering from there. And here we are 22 years later, and I'm still here.
Still going. Yeah. Nah. And that's one of the things too. And I imagine just on the STS standpoint alone, I'll get to Rocco and back to Rocco in a moment, from being a graduate in 1999 and going back down to the field to teach, talk about a very cool full circle moment, I should say, for you. I mean, giving back in that sense, it had to feel great.
It was humbling because, again, I really didn't feel I should be there. I don't consider myself an E person. I took the course. I went through it. Yes, I passed it. I mean, I learned some great things from a bunch of great guys. and have still friends out there that taken the, with me at STS that we still keep in touch. And of course, we lost people that we thought would never lose there, but it was never I never took it as that, I'm one of them. No, I did take the course, and yeah, I kind of went through it and I understand it. And when I was teaching it out at STS, it's like, again, I had the what's the word I'm looking for? I knew I still had a place to go back to. I knew I was never going to stay there. Bobby Picciano put it the best when we graduated STS was that he had the psych coming in to come talk to me because I actually had to go back to corrections when we were done being 6.5 months, 7 months there. And it was kind of funny.
Yeah, it's true. It's a good point.
It's not saying it's a different attitude from STS to our department, but there's more of a camaraderie per se on the police side than there was on the corrections side, because the corrections, we were smaller numbers, but we kind of knew what we had to do, and guys just, there was different attitudes and different things. And once you left there, you left. You were away from the prison system. Where at NYPD, those guys had the guys who built Paul Talty's house, those guys went out there, they were, construction. Those guys, that's what they did. So guys all looked out for each other. Not saying we didn't look out for our own, but we were spread out also. It's not like where 9 truck guys are going to be Long Island guys. 5 truck guys are Staten Island guys. Our unit guys were everywhere you could think of in the 5 boroughs and all up north or way out on Long Island. So, we were only ran about 45 guys deep. It was full-time guys. So we were spread out everywhere. So, maybe after work, we'd have a couple beers together. But then after that, there wasn't a lot of guys who actually hung out together because we were so far apart.
Right. It wasn't because of a lack of want to. It's just the way that the logistics worked.
Yeah. You go to Long Island and go have a few beers. You're going to drive from Long Island now to get upstate.
Right. It's hard.
Yeah. You got to be careful when we're doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's hard. That's hard. And that's the thing too, like we were talking about off the air, people think of Rikers Island and they think, just there. No, there's a lot of other jails in New York City that you're going to go to on a whim, and you got to get through that traffic. That's why it's important to have all those REPs. And not that you guys didn't want to partner up with other units, when it was necessary. Certainly Ground Zero, in the extreme nature of that circumstance, was a good example of those joint partnerships working, albeit under, somber circumstances. But like I said in the promo for the show, when I was putting it out to promote your appearance, you guys have the philosophy for the most part is, listen, we're going to handle it ourselves, and you did. And to do that there's about, I don't know the numbers now, but I think at the peak, there's about somewhere between 350 to 400 guys in NYPD emergency service. To do that with basically an eighth of that, if my math is correct, and don't hold me to it because it was never my strong suit, is incredible.
Yeah. Like I said, our support staff is only when we needed them. So it was the main core of guys that were assigned to the unit that were full-time. And the thing we had was that you had multiple jails. Well, 4 jails and 4 boroughs, not counting the courts that we had to deal with, then dealing with the city itself or the main island. So it was, it wasn't that we were spread thin, but we were, and then we have guys who just did escorts. So the guys were on the road all the time. So at a given time, if we didn't call anybody in, which we didn't, we handled ourselves. The thing is, we never call anybody in if we did an outside borough or something, because if I asked NYPD to come assist us, of course they'd say they help us. The first thing we're going to ask them is they got to turn their weapons in at the door. That's a hard
ask. Yeah.
We're used to doing that. And the guys used to laugh at us because they were like, hey, you guys are crazy. That was the persona we grew up with. We understood that we had to deal with what we had to deal with by ourselves, and that's what we did.
Because I was going to ask you, and I apologize if it's silly, but again, I'm learning this all in real time from you, and I'm glad you're here, but you kind of answered it. Is corrections ESU armed all the time, or is that just under special circumstances?
Special circumstances. Once we go into the jail, now the newer day, they have tasers on them. But back in the day, we had a pepper can on us, and we carried a Saleaton. Not too many guys were allowed to carry Coca-Colas because they could hurt somebody. Saleatons were bamboo, so it stung.
Yeah.
So it was like I said, back in it when we first started with our riot bats, they were timber. You hit somebody with it, they knew about it.
Yeah.
Those,
Yeah.
those they faded away to safer ways and try not to. But only a couple of us were allowed to have the Coca-Colas, and it wasn't that we could hit you with it. We'd use it to ply your arms out, because once you got your arms locked under your body, we could sit
Hard
there
to
and
move.
say, hey, I'm not gonna get your arms out. But if I wedge that Coca-Cola up under your armpit and get it on your arm, I can pop your arm out and get a cuff on you. So because you can't do that with a Saleaton because they bend, or we weren't trained with the P24s at the time. So there was a lot of things that we could use and not use around. So we had to be creative, per se.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
In an environment like that, yeah. I mean, listen, they're creative when they're making shivs out of who knows what and other weapons in there. So you got to get creative to counteract that. You got to stay 10 steps ahead of these guys. They're bad guys for a reason.
Yeah. Well, and that's they have, depending on what housing they're in or what they have all day to make stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that was our job, to go in there and go find this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And we found a story. We had a guy from out in California, was part of one of the gangs out there, and we were searching his cell. I don't know, for some reason he looked up, and when I looked up, I looked at the light, and the light didn't look right, and I pushed on the light. And next minute, I saw something move up there. What the hell was that? Now I started getting creative. I got my screwdriver out. I'm working on it. We made him stand and watch, and he just shook his head, and I took out a sword. He made pretty much almost a sword out of plastic bags and heating it up and melting it. And I was like, this is impressive.
I get me mad.
He just looked at me and kind of shrugged his shoulders like, hey, you got me. I'm like, yeah, obviously. I'm like, what did you plan on doing with this thing?
Well,
He just shook his head and goes, yeah, got it. He goes, that's all I have to do all day. So I made something. I said, yeah. I'm like, what are you going to do? Run down the hallway with it like a freaking Darth Vader?
yeah,
But
well, listen,
that's
little
their
samurai
job.
training.
What?
Little samurai training, good for the soul. Therapeutic, good way to pass the time by.
Yeah, well, but again, like I said, that was their job, was to make stuff, and our job was to find stuff.
Oh my God. And that's the dangerous part. They have all day, and they can come up with some real wild machinations. Even from the self-harm standpoint, they can make different machinations to harm themselves if they're feeling that way too. And that's another layer to it. So, and it's a lot. It's a lot. And sometimes, depending on who you are, time is a beautiful thing. And then there is times when time is not such a good thing. And in situations like that, where you have very dangerous people with nothing to do all day, the last thing you want to give them is time. But it's the nature of the beast.
Yeah, unfortunately. But then you had people in there who were so articulate, or we had one inmate that drew pictures because he was a lingerie designer, and it was like you walk in by a cell and you look in like, what are you doing, dude? What is all this on the wall? And it's like, and then you'd find out who the guy is, and like, why are you locked up? It could be for domestic, could be, not paying child alimony or whatever, but he had to keep working. And, he, again, had it where he was able to just do his drawings and mail them out during the mail call. And it was like, he goes, I got to keep my business, he goes, and it was like pretty impressive. Of course you can't keep half this stuff. And of course, then it was because of his status as an inmate, it wasn't that bad. They kind of moved into a lighter security area where he could keep his stuff. And needless to say, he didn't last long there. He ended up getting bailed out.
Yeah, well, at least hopefully he got his life together after that. Like I said, some of these guys, they're in there for petty stuff. They're not necessarily, dangerous guys. You got to keep an eye on them, of course, but they're not necessarily dangerous guys. I'll get to you retiring in 2009 in a moment. But, listen, in the prison system, you're seeing it now because the prison in Brooklyn in particular is housing a very, very, very prominent individual who may or may not have used to run a country, if you know who I'm talking about. Yeah. So that being said, when it comes to prominent, you got mob bosses going through there. You got other individuals that have gone through there. What are some of the more prominent names in terms of escorts or just having them on island, period, that you can recall?
Going back to it, John Gotti was there. The thing with John Gotti was you had a cell locator card with a picture of it and his autograph on it. or his signature, so you knew who he was, and those would disappear every day because those were mementos. Until the time the boss actually had to start yelling at people to stop doing that. Of course, Larry Davis, uh, the the Happy Lands guy who lit the Happy Lands on fire back in the day. I just got into emergency just as Larry Davis was finishing out. Then you had the guys who killed the 2 detectives out of Staten Island. That one guy, Jackson.
Oh yeah, in 03.
Him was an interesting one because the city could not put the death penalty on him, but the 2 police officers or detectives at the time were also ATF helping out. So they were actually blessed with federal. So when we were finished with Jackson, we actually brought him over to the same jail Mr. Venezuela is at, and we dropped him off there, and his demeanor changed in seconds. He's like, well, what am I doing here? It's like, oh, we're just going to explain to you that you have federal charges now because the 2 individuals that you killed were federal officers also. And now you're going to be charged under federal law, which has a death penalty. So I don't know whatever happened with that because that was many years ago.
He got overturned. He's doing life with no parole. It got overturned in 2006.
Yeah, so we dropped him off there, and it was pretty much a lot of stuttering and a lot of staring like, I'm not going to be in the city system anymore. No, that's what you got. You got what you deserve. That we should have got more, but unfortunately, we have no control of that. But most of the high profiles and the superstars that we would have to escort. After that, you had the terrorists out of Manhattan who stabbed the officer, and we had to run him the inmate up to Westchester. In turn, they moved him further up north. Those are the guys we had to escort. So again, our head was on a swivels because, we didn't ask for assistance from anybody because we usually moved everything in the dark, or we were in unmarked vehicles. So, just lights on. So nobody really knew who we were per se. Right. They just knew we were a bunch of escort vehicles coming down. And depending on the situation, we'd have NYPD come or meet us at a courthouse just to get our staging area up and available in case anything did happen and we couldn't cover the whole perimeter. So we did have a good rapport with them with that.
Yeah. For those of you guys in the audience, most of you guys know, but there may be some of you in the audience that are like, well, what are you guys talking about? Just really quick, 2001 to 2004 was a very, very dark time for the NYPD Detective Bureau. They lost several detectives in different incidents. 2 detectives were killed on 9/11, that being Detective Joe Viggiano from ESU, Claude Richards from the Bomb Squad. Jamie Betancourt gets killed off duty, breaking up a domestic dispute. He was stabbed in the Bronx in March of 2002. And then Pat Rafferty and Bobby Parker got killed in September of 2004. A year before this, what we're talking about is James Nemorin and Rodney Andrews were undercover doing a gun buy and bust on Staten Island, and they were posing as gun buyers. This freaking animal, Jackson, as you mentioned, like the coward he was sitting in the backseat of the vehicle, and he executes both detectives in the vehicle and he leaves their bodies on the street. He was later caught in drag on trying to get away on a ferry. To which this is the only funny part of the whole situation. The woman that called in said, "That's either the ugliest woman I've ever seen or a man." So that's a little humor there. They got the guy. He did get sentenced to death originally, but like I said, he had a second trial in 2006 where it was turned to life with no parole. So those 2 guys are definitely remembered, and that happened. The anniversary is tomorrow, March 10th, 2003. 23 years tomorrow that this happened, actually. So it's ironic you bring them up. Time really does fly.
Yeah.
So they're remembered, and our hearts go out to their families on what's going to be a somber day for them and anybody that knew them. 2009, you retire, and it's a young man's game. It's hard to be in an environment like that. 22 years, you want it, but the thing is, we were talking about it off the air when I was getting the title underneath your name. You wanted to do more, but was it an injury that forced you out? What happened?
It was more of the time was changing. They were kind of putting a little pressure on us for no reason because we were now becoming these scapegoats for calls and incidents. And I saw the writing on the wall, and I'm like, you know what? I had something to fall back on, which was Rocco. And I figured, you know what? 22 years, more than enough time. Wouldn't have mind staying longer, but the cards weren't in it. And my post was put up for not to have my post anymore. So I kind of got outbidded out of the spot that I didn't have anymore. So now here I am with 22 years, and I'm going to go back on the search team. Yeah, that's not. I'm a little too old for that. So and again, it was a good timing. Unfortunately, not what I wanted to do yet, but it was worth it. At the end of the day, I don't regret it. I was fortunate enough. Like I said, I had a good career. I got to play both sides of the law enforcement side. I was out at Floyd Bennett Field for a while, assisting in all kinds of training with those guys, and got to run around a little bit with them. And I got to go back to my home and make money up there with correction department, and then I stepped off. So there really was no major regrets with it. It was just the timing wasn't the greatest, but it was time.
I hear you. You got out in one piece, and that's the biggest thing. You're able to make, again, I always say it. You guys know what I'm about to say in the audience. Whether you worked FDPD or corrections, make the walk to the pension section. You got to make the walk, because there's a lot of poor guys and gals over the years that unfortunately did not get the chance to do the same. So, listen, especially in an environment like that, corrections has lost a few guys in the line of duty over the years, including, right a year before we retired, a guy got killed off duty, defending his property from guys that wanted to steal his motorcycle. So you never know. I mean, listen, they got a dangerous job too. So I'm glad you were able to make that walk to the pension section, even if it wasn't on the time frame you wanted to. Plus, between Rocco and you're still with Rocco, so you've been more than busy in retirement.
Oh yeah, this is this for a so-called part-time job turned into now full-time with the company, and they keep me busy, but they also take care of me. So, and we are teaching all around the country. Again, we have standby services out of New York, out of the Midwest, where we're based out of Baton Rouge, and then out in California or New Mexico, we have people calling us to do standby work, making entries into confined spaces, and we provide a service for them for doing that.
Yeah, it's an important thing, and I'm glad we were able to document it in detail tonight. We got the rapid fire coming up, and Christian Williams says they're called New York's boldest for a reason. That's true, Christian. Couldn't have said it better myself if I tried. We got the rapid fire coming up, but not without a word first from our good friend Bill Ryan. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the Elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike to New Haven podcast. Billy, of course, the co-executive producer and creator of our Tales from the Boom Room miniseries. Okay, first question, the rapid fire. You can say pass if you want. You know how the rapid fire goes. Besides the ropes, hardest skill to master during those 6 months back in '99 at STS?
The hardest thing to skill, I guess, keeping your mouth shut.
Well, there's that.
You don't say anything. You do what you're told to do, and you keep your head on and learn what they give you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. No, sir.
Yep.
As you're gonna say?
No, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, there you go. Second, you kind of touched on this earlier, but I'll still ask it anyway. You can expand on it because you did answer part of it earlier. Biggest difference between operating in corrections emergency service and not just going to STS, but teaching at STS?
Again, they're pretty much on the same level per se, because again, these guys want to learn. Me teaching out at STS because I was an outside entity teaching there, given the opportunity, but I proved myself that I knew what I was talking about. So that was the hard part for me to do that. But the guys were all gentlemen and ladies who were out at the field and coming in to get their refreshers. So it was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a very rewarding experience, as was highlighted tonight. There's not much good for the third question of the rapid fire that came out of 9/11. We wish it didn't happen in the first place, and that all those guys and everybody that was working that day at the Trade Center, those people in the planes, were still here with us. That being said, small silver linings were a lot of good lessons that, paved the way for future responses and future prevention of tragedies came out of it. On your side, if there's one lesson that taught you about preparation per se, not that you didn't know about it already, but preparation to that level, what would you say that lesson was?
Having your equipment ready. having a cache of gear ready to go, even though as much as people like, oh, we need that for something else, or I can use it now and bring it out back later, is no, it's there for a reason. That's what it's for. And if we don't ever use it, thank God.
Mhm.
And if we have to use it, we have it.
Good. I like that answer. Very good answer. Second to last question, the rapid fire. The fourth one. A lot of rescue disciplines to master, like we talked about tonight. Doesn't matter if you're in an FD special operations company or a PD special operations unit. Rescue work is rescue work. What's one overlooked technical rescue discipline you feel today?
Technical is them on the rope side of this. They're making it easier and easier because the equipment is easier to work. So you're not thinking as much as a rescuer per se on patient packaging, on certain things, because everything is so now geared for simplified that you're not thinking old school where I need to work this in. I need to keep that person tight in here. I got to make sure this happens because everything is pre-built now.
Right. That's true. And you're seeing that in the fire service too. It's across the board. It's not just a police thing. It is. Yeah, it is. But you still got to keep those skills sharp. So it's getting the technology now being what it is too. It's getting easier, which is not bad, but it might, you still got to have that balancing act of putting in the work on your own end. So that's true. And hey, listen, you would know you did it for a long time. You're still teaching it too. So that's true too. And the last question, rapid fire, listen, I know you said earlier, you didn't necessarily feel like you were one of them, and that's a very humble answer. But even if it wasn't the NYPD emergency patch, you still earned that corrections ESU patch. And as guys, if you could see in the chat tonight that you worked with, and even guys you don't know that are just tuning into the show, they have a lot of respect for that patch, as they should. What does it mean, looking back on it, 14 of your 22 years in correction, to have worn that patch?
I'm proud of it. I mean, it was nice. It was you were part of an elite group. Just like NYPD's elite group, SOC's elite group, you're a part of a family that you were trained to do what your job was, to take care of people. And hopefully you didn't have to use some of those skills, but unfortunately we had to, and again, like I said, getting through our specialized training in-house and then going through NYPD's training just made me a better person. Yeah,
absolutely. Again, as smooth rapid fire that we had tonight, I appreciate it. And thankfully the technology came around on my end, and we didn't lose out on the show. A couple glitches, like I said, we'll edit them out. We're going to Men in Black it, like I said earlier. And thanks to producer Victor for holding down the fort. And thanks to my computer for nothing, for almost robbing me of a good episode. That said, before I say goodbye to the audience, Bob, if you got any shout outs, go right ahead and fire away.
No, I just appreciate you letting me come on here and explain our side of the correction department. And, all those guys out there, I appreciate, the good word and everything else. And I do miss a lot of people, and we will see them on the other side for the ones who are not with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said, my friend. Stay around. I'll talk to you off air along with producer Victor. Thanks to everybody that tuned in. And Bob won't be the last corrections ESU guy we get on the show. We're going to keep working on getting more guys, not just on the NYPD ESU side, which we'll obviously continue to profile. But like I said, let's try to get some MTA ESU guys, Port Authority, Suffolk, Nassau, anybody we can get, even some of the Jersey ESU guys. If you know of any that may want to come on and do this, by all means, give them my contact information. I'd love to have them. I'd love to learn about their aspect of being in an emergency service unit for a police department, wherever that may be. They're more than welcome to come on down. Yonkers, you name it. Hey, come on down. I'd love to have you. All right. Thanks to everybody that tuned in tonight. And thanks as always again to producer Victor for holding it down for me. This is why he makes the big bucks. I don't know where I'd be without him. And thanks to Bob for being such a great guest. Coming up next on the Mike to New Haven podcast. You had something to say, Bob?
Nope. Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Like I said, stick around. We'll talk off air. Coming up next on the Mike to New Haven podcast, New York City EMS pre-FDNY merger. But back then, EMS in New York City was a stepping stone. If you wanted to be a fireman or if you wanted to be a cop, you started there. He ended up becoming a New York City police officer and worked in OEM for a little bit. So he bounced around. A lot of interesting stories with him. I'm talking about Dwayne Rose, or as some of you know him, Fritzy. So he'll be here this Friday as I look back on his career. So that should be a fun show. And who do we have coming up after Fritz? If I remember correctly, yes, we'll be profiling something important in emergency services across the board, and that's mental health. And a returning guest will be here for that. And that's going to be Eddie Hartnett, former NYPD deputy chief, and of course, Yonkers police commissioner, who was on the program a while ago. He'll be back next Monday, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, for those of you listening on the audio side, it's a fitting song for what we talked about tonight, Prison. But then again, it's just a great song from a great album. As you guys know, I'm a big Creed fan. So from their 1997 album, My Own Prison, judge me if you want to, I'm still a big fan of Creed. From their 97 album, My Own Prison, they're playing us out tonight with My Own Prison. In the meantime, on behalf of Bob Cower of the New York City Corrections Department Emergency Service Unit and producer Victor and all of you and our wonderful audience, I'm Mike Colón. We'll see you next time. And as the E-men like to say, anytime, baby. Take care. Good night.